People get a lot of leadership training. That's just the top-down thing. They need training in steering. They don't teach steership, but that's what they need. They need the capacity to steer because the world is a very fluid place. It's not a linear place where things proceed like this. It's all over the place. And you have to be able to uh, know what the shifts are and the results of what your steering commands are in order to make the adjustments so that you steer differently. Because it's so easy to screw up an otherwise successful organization. There's some really amazing examples of this. Like if you want to order new shoes, you get online and you go to Amazon.com. You don't get on the line and go to Sears and Roebuck catalog, because Sears and Roebuck didn't stay up with the changing times, and the catalog's gone. Sears is gone. There was another example of, like, nobody listening to this broadcast owns a Kodak camera. Kodak was extremely successful. They had a building in Rochester, New York, where they had an elevator that went up to the 12th floor so that the executives wouldn't have to talk to the staff. And of course, the staff was saying, digital is coming. And the executives were saying, we have been doing this for 100 years. We'll do it for another 100 years. And Kodak collapsed. There was a fleet in 1923 of 14 ships that were going south down the California coast, intending to turn into the Santa Barbara Channel. And the guy leading the squadron was extremely experienced. He'd been in all kinds of conditions. And these boats were dealing with a very, very heavy fog. You really couldn't see anything hardly anywhere. And so they weren't sure about the navigation there, because, well, there was this radio station over there on Point Honda, but those things were like brand new. Like, they'd been around a couple of years. You didn't really know whether you trusted them or not. So the commander said, I can do dead reckoning. And there was apparently he was given information about that radio station and a few other things, but he said, we're doing what I say. I'm in charge. And so here the boats were going down, and they were headed to what they thought was Santa Barbara Channel, and it was not Santa Barbara Channel. You can see in the picture there were a number of boats that are named there. Some people died. It was a complete mess until you get to ship number 11. Number 11, the junior officers were saying, sir, there's something wrong here. We are not where the commander says we are. We're going to have a wreck. And so he decided to listen to his junior officers, and kind of they talked together, and they figured out, let's kind of do both what the captain said, or the squadron commander says, but we're also going to take like what we are thinking. So we're going to move the ship several hundred yards further out to sea. So we're kind of following, but we're kind of not. And ship 11 and 12, 13, and 14 were following, did not wreck. That's how blind spots can completely blind a very experienced person. If you're only relying on your own senses, then you will screw up, because you have blind spots. You fill in, you invent information, you invent reality. If you have a system, it has to have a feedback loop in order to be adjusting to what's happening. You can't steer something with no feedback loop. So let's go look at what feedback loops are. Let's go over here and look at a classic mechanical feedback loop. So we have an on-off switch. The on-off switch says, furnace, turn on. And the furnace pumps out hot air, or if it's air conditioning, pumps out cold air. But the furnace says, yes, sir, and obeys the on-off switch. And the furnace generates hot air, let's say, and that hot air, the thermostat has to measure. It's built to measure hot air. And the thermostat says, it's getting too hot in here. I've been set for 76 degrees, or that's 24 degrees if you're, Celsius. And so therefore, on-off switch, turn the furnace off. And this is another command loop. So you maintain a very even temperature this way by this kind of circular command structure. Everybody gets to tell somebody else what they have to do. Think about driving a car. Get a human being in this loop. So we have a driver. The driver says, car, you're going to do what I say. Turn the wheel, the car turns, foot on the gas, goes faster, and so forth. I'm the driver. I'm in charge of you, car. The car says, fine, it does its thing. It moves forward, but it also gives, like, it provides information through gauges. It's this many RPMs. The gas tank is this full, and so forth. And so that has to be measured. That's what's happening. If you ignore the fact that the gas tank is out of gas, it's like the system doesn't work. So you have to read what the car is saying. But there's another piece of this thermostat here, this this measuring system, and that's the feelings or the senses of the driver. So the eyes of the driver are actually not really part of the steering as much as they are the measuring, because if you shut your eyes, you go crash, the end of the trip. So the driver must listen to the driver's senses. And there's lots of senses, all kinds of things. So again, you have this command loop. Everybody's commanding everybody else what to do. So here's a classic drawing of a traditional structure. Everybody should recognize it. It's top-down, very clear command structure. Board tells CEO, tells manager, tells staff, this is what you do. One-way downward command structure. How do you get a steering loop into a top-down classic hierarchical management structure? And the solution comes through something called sociocracy, which uses both end thinking to have both a vertical and a horizontal organization. Sociocracy is ruled by relationships, as opposed to democracy, which is ruled generally by majority vote from a mass of people. Hindenburg was somebody that I ran across because I had been looking for a way to run a business democratically where I could vote for my boss. Couldn't find it until I finally ran across him running an engineering company that was an intentional family experiment in the Netherlands and down in Rotterdam. And when I ran across Gerard, I realized he had something really new. And had been a very brilliant electronics engineer for Philips. He invented the flat speaker that's in your telephone. Bright guy. He said when he took over the company, he looked at the power structure of the company and said, as an electronics engineer, I would never design a power structure that way because it has no feedback loop. You can't steer something with no feedback loop. Why is it that human-based feedback loops require egalitarian structures? What does that mean? So this is going to take some explanation. So here's a classic drawing of a traditional structure. It's top down. I've simplified this here by putting board and CEO in dotted, and we just are looking at the manager and staff. How do you bring a feedback loop into this? Because it's just a downward structure. So to make this really work and not have the kind of mistakes that commander made, that squadron, you need to have consent decision making. Leadership is part of steering, but it's not the whole thing. Measurement, the assessment of what's going on is absolutely essential to make the command decisions to make the process go forward. But looking at the thermostat here first, the staff brings in data. We worked 8 hours today. We did 15 widgets, whatever. But the staff senses have to be there in that measuring system, along with the manager's senses. So everybody together is going to see a lot more than the manager can. And how does the boss and the staff make decisions together? Well, they have to use something called consent decision making, which completely means it's a completely flat organization here. So we're back into both ends now. We have both over here, a command structure, vertical, but over here we have a very flat structure. And they go back and forth between each other. There has to be conversations. So people are, doing work. You're out on the floor of the factory, doing this adjustment and that adjustment. That's fine. That's all leadership. That's, making the vertical thing go. But if you don't say, how is this actually going? Are we, why is it that we sold 10 less of these last month and 20 more of those? What's going on? Why is that? Is that, and if you don't have that constant correction, then you can't steer, and you're not on a road in a business. You're in this vibrant economy, or maybe it's not vibrant. Maybe the stock market's crashing, whatever. But if you're not making continuous adjustments, you go off the road as a business. That squadron smashing happens all the time, and sometimes it's not quite that dramatic. It's just the company is doing less than optimal work because they're not thinking together. Running a business is a lot more complicated than driving a car. So in order to really know what's going on, you have to do it. And if you don't, things are going to get screwed up because managers alone can't measure well because they have blind spots. The inability to do transformative learning all the time, getting the data right, falsely filling in stuff, all that kind of thing happens to anyone. And the only way to get that corrected is for them to be able to say, I object. This is not feeling right. And you have to listen to it. You've set up a situation where you have to listen, and then you hear more. Because very often managers will say, well, I'm a good leader. I participative leader. I listen to everybody's opinion, and then of course I make up my own mind. Well, it's like, no, that's the dangerous point, because the employees have to be able to say, no, I object. But object is it's very difficult to say the word I want in English, because object is not it. In Dutch, it says, I have a really heavy feeling about this. And you have to listen to that heavy feeling that they have, because that's going to carry a lot of wisdom. Which is why I like to say consent decision is one that, good enough for now, safe enough to try. It's kind of light and happy. And everybody's that way, then nobody has an objection. But if they're not light and happy and they feel heavy, a bezwaar in Dutch, then that's a bad thing. And you need to pay attention to that, and you can't ignore it. And what you do is with it is you don't take that argument, you just scoop it in, both end thinking, scoop it into all the things that you're doing. Consent uses both end thinking, and the decisions are, is it good enough for now and safe enough to try? Because we're trying to do both and thinking. We're not trying to do like, this is it, where they have an argument and they vote to make the decision. That doesn't happen. It's like it's good enough for now, safe enough to try type measurement. So objections, saying I don't like this, are an opportunity to combine ideas, to do both and thinking. Blind spots have been known about for a while, I think since 1633 or something, that somebody figured that out. But both and thinking does not appear in the literature until 1980, and that only shows up in some mediation books. And so it's a whole new way of thinking. You probably, if you're at mid-age, have never been exposed to it at all. And even if you're like young age right now, they're really just sort of getting into it. So we're used to thinking of, justice, the person's guilty or innocent, and we have a little scale here, and we have to determine what to do. Let's have an argument about who has the stronger argument. Both and thinking says, let's just put all the ideas together. And so when you do that, you tend to end up with contradictory stuff together, and they tend to flip back and forth. We have here two people standing on the side of a number. One says it's a 9, one says it's a 6. How do we do both? That is another example of like, okay, we've got two different things. What's between them? So it's not who has the right argument. It's how do we get all the arguments in the picture? And that often forces you to have transformative learning. It's like, I hadn't thought about that. So those are all very important elements of accurately steering a company.